Grind was made for no HUD. If there's one playlist I wish there was there next to the classic Conquest and Breakthrough modes, it'd definitely be to add on top of those game modes a no HUD realism mode. I think there's a good chunk of the community that's been calling for these since the release of Battlefield 5, but with the past couple of days of playing Grind, it's got me really thinking if there's one playlist that I think would work the best for no HUD, it'd definitely be Grind. Now, playing no HUD in Battlefield games is nothing too new for me. I've done hours and hours on end recording videos of new maps with the HUD turned off, mainly to just appreciate the aesthetics that DICE delivers whenever they introduce new maps, something I feel can't be truly appreciated unless you take the HUD off. But with that said, as much as it's visually appealing to have your HUD off, gameplay wise, I'm not sure modes like Conquest and Breakthrough are necessarily the best way. Now don't get me wrong, if there's any playlist I wish was there in the future, it'd be a no HUD playlist, so I'm not saying Breakthrough and Conquest shouldn't have one. It's just after playing them, especially in BF5 where the pace of the game is slower and visibility is still a challenge, having those modes in a playlist that's all spread out like Conquest would in my opinion slow down the game even more, and it would also make it extremely difficult to figure out who's who and what's going on the battlefield. Now, I do think over time you'd get more visually trained to pick up things on the map that would give you information which normally you would get by using your HUD. So for instance, you could just look at the flag on each territory to figure out who owns the territory and who doesn't, by which faction is up on the flag at the time. Of course, it's not as easy as just turning off the HUD for all players and just making a full playlist that's just dedicated to no HUD just by doing something as easy as that. You have to take in a lot of factors like, gadgets that would be obsolete, like the flare gun. It would also be extremely difficult to figure out who's winning and who's losing without seeing your ticker rate on the map. It also would be a nightmare to figure out the capture zones and the boundaries that they contain. But when it comes to the general sense of the game modes like Conquest and how it's really spread out, I feel like that mode wouldn't suit a no HUD mode all too well, and I could see that being very overwhelming. And even modes like Breakthrough, which are a bit more contained, I still think wouldn't work all that great. But when it comes to Grind, I feel like Grind is actually onto something. In the blog posted by DICE about Grind, they shared their intent to keep the gameplay linear, focusing the combat in the middle. Because the gameplay is linear, there is less spacing to be concerned about. Maps like Twisted Steel now have me completely unconcerned about being flanked by the side because I'm up on top of a bridge, and because the out of bounds is so narrow, I don't have to be concerned about being sniped from a player way off to the side of the map away from the bridge. It keeps all the playing in a tight, narrow area, leaving me again less overwhelmed if I was playing no HUD, where possibly someone could be camping in all these different angles on the map, putting me full focus of my intent straight ahead of me rather than being concerned of what's to the side of me. I also have the luxury of having all my teammates pretty close by, so getting revives and resupplied is much easier to come by rather than running around trying to identify who's who. Battlefield 5 does make it a bit difficult with your HUD off to recognize who is your teammate and who isn't because of the diversity of the uniforms per faction. It isn't something like the other Battlefield titles like Battlefield 1, which the uniforms were much more cohesive and you could recognize who were your teammates and who weren't. So having your HUD on does, get you so used to picking up, which teammates is which, and you just get so used to it, so you can understand why it would be difficult for players just to turn it right off. But Grind makes it pretty simple. You are able to recognize who your teammates are much easier because you can just look at the players that are pushing the direction you're going in, and if you look closely you can see them shooting in that direction as well. So that's one of the really big indicators for me, and 9 out of 10 times when I see a player in Grind pushing towards the direction I'm going, it's been a teammate. So it hasn't been all too difficult to figure that out. It's very difficult to get things where the enemy team is now pushing behind you. That does happen probably once or twice a game. If the game is pretty well balanced, you might get the enemy team where they can flank underneath you on maps like Twisted Steel, where there's basically 3 levels to the map. So that is a possibility that does kind of change up the dynamics of the game, but overall it's not as consistent as something like Conquest, where anyone can change the flow of the game by just choosing to not go in one big circle capturing flags, but could cut across the map and easily just change the dynamics of the game by them choosing to do something that's not the norm. When you play grind though, it's a bit of a grind, and you got to push towards one direction and one direction only, and by doing that it makes it pretty simple to recognize who's on your team and who isn't. Now, like I said earlier, I do believe a no-HUD playlist would slow down Battlefield 5, and I wasn't sure if that's a good thing, but when it comes to grind, because it is so intense, I could see it being slowed down a bit. Now, I'm not saying that we need to make it a full no-HUD mode, but just having the option to have that playlist there for players who feel like grind as it is already is a bit too action-packed and overwhelming. A no-HUD playlist for this would slow it down more, I think, and would make it more appealing. I would just recommend DICE to nerf all the noob tubes. Those are bad enough already in Battlefield 5, and I think they should be left to destroying things like sandbags only, where you can leave things like grenades there, but noob tubes are just a bit too much. And in a no HUD mode, I feel like the noob tubes would just be used even more, making it more of a mode that's full of explosions rather than using your gunfire to kill people. I gotta say, it's been really nice not to have tanks or airplanes or any other vehicles there, keeping more of the explosions down and more opportunities to be crawling under machine gun fire, which I think in a no HUD mode looks absolutely epic. There's no denying though, there needs to be a lot of thought when introducing any game mode, especially something like a no HUD. And I'm not going as far as saying I'm hoping that Battlefield turns into a no HUD full realism genre. I'm not going that far, but I do think there are modes out there that would be more suited for it, something that is more immersive, and I honestly think it's a great way to bring a new perspective to Battlefield, giving it more of a life cycle. And I do think grind is one of those game modes that I feel would definitely suit the no HUD realistic mode more. But what do you guys think about grind in no HUD? I'd recommend giving it a try a bit. It's not as punishing as maybe going full no HUD in conquest mode, but yet again, grind is just a punishing genre in itself, so you are going to be at a bit of a disadvantage, but it is pretty cool running around and just not seeing any HUD and seeing your teammates run right by you and being able to focus all your intent in one direction, not having to be too concerned with being flanked to the left and right of you, at least on maps like Twisted Steel and Rotterdam. So but feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. But that is it for you guys today. Again, I always appreciate you guys being here. I am Livin. I'll catch you guys again later.